Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug McMahon. This is the first installment of Alternate World History, where I try to bring some of the historical things that might not be covered quite well in the history books. Today, I wanted to start out with cave paintings, the Rosetta Stone, and hieroglyphics, because this is the earliest forms of actual writing that we as Homo sapiens can actually turn to and look at as actual written material. Now, that's not to say that in the future there might be changes because things might be found, but we're going to go over a little bit about how writing developed, and very, very early writing, which one of the other things that is a offshoot of hieroglyphs is a cuneiform, which that's the first writing that was found in Sumeria. But today I want to go over cave paintings, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and I'm also going to bring up an article on South American petroglyphs that were found, and those were found in 2019, and it's called the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients, which that'll be really interesting. We'll be going over the pictures, talking about it, and basically just hopefully bringing a little bit of history and knowledge to the people that might not have time to sit down and read a history book, or they might not be up to date with certain things, or they just want to go back to learning. So this is the first installment of that, and with that, let's go ahead and bring up our screen. Hopefully everything is working well. I have the chat working in the YouTube stream here. So if you join in, please go ahead and say hi. If you have any comments or anything, go ahead and leave them for us. As you can see on the screen, I just popped up cave paintings. One of the interesting things about cave paintings is how old they are. You don't really find a whole lot of cave paintings nowadays. The cave painting nowadays is done with spray paint, or they call it graffiti, but you know what? In 40,000 years, graffiti that is sprayed on stuff, if it survives, it's going to be like cave paintings to us in 40,000 years. So that's something just to think about, that whenever people are leaving things on any type of a surface, just think of what people 10,000 years in the future are actually going to think about that. I want to start out talking about cave paintings in particular, because a lot of these are anywhere from between 25,000 to 40,000 years old. Now, to put that into perspective, 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, or any of the other species of Homo, was still learning what was going on. They were in the Stone Age. They were in an ice age. There were giant glaciers covering humongous amounts of the earth. So they typically left cave paintings of which, as you can see here, that were found down in Argentina, of their hands. One of the weird things about this is that, as you can see, and as it's written there, that it's mostly left hands. So people would stick their hand up on the cave wall, and they would have ochre or something else in their mouth, as you can see by the picture, which is right here, and they would literally blow it out of their mouths. At least that's what we think. We don't know. Maybe they had rudimentary straws. Maybe they had small bamboo, because you can take small bamboo and you can actually punch out the middles of it and it becomes a straw. So maybe they would load up something like that. But without us actually being there, we really don't know exactly how cave paintings were done, but we do know what they were made of. Most of the time, as in these cave paintings here, they were done with what's red ochre, and it would be either a plant-based or maybe the blood of an animal, and they would literally put their hand up on the wall, like I said, and blow onto it. So it's very interesting. And as you can read, or I'll read this out, that in archaeology, cave paintings are a type of parietal art, which includes petroglyphs or engravings that are found on the ceilings or walls of caves. Now, the reason why we can find these is because they're in caves. Caves have a very distinct set of parameters. They tend to stay at certain temperatures. They are out of the weather, so everything that is on the walls gets saved. Some of the caves that I have actually done research on, these paintings are anywhere from 100 feet to 500 feet back in these caves. So, yes, you get moisture, but it's out of the normal weather patterns. So that's why you can find these. And this one here was found in Argentina. There are caves that are found in Indonesia. Sulawesi, the oldest, are often constructed from hand stencils and simple geometric shapes. Well, simple geometric shapes, that's another one. Those are the very oldest ones that we can date so far. More recently, in 2021, cave art of a pig was found in Sulawesi, Indonesia, and it dated to over 45,500 years ago. So that's just within the last 2 years that was found. So as time goes on, and we as a society, human beings, are going deeper into caves, the equipment to allow us to go safely deeper into caves, we are finding more and more of these art forms, the petroglyphs and the cave paintings, in all sorts of different places. We're finding them in Indonesia, we're finding them in Africa, Europe, which most of the caves in Europe have been looked over. But it's the band on the earth in which they're found, because you have to realize that 45,000 years ago, the earth was in an ice age. So the North and the South poles were completely covered in ice, and the ice encroached down to certain latitudes and longitudes. And there was the band right around the middle of the earth where it was still warm enough not to have deep, deep glaciers. So where a lot of these are being found at they are in that band that surrounds the entire earth. So that's something that you should always think about, is when were these found and at what places on earth, because they will fall within that band most of the times. I'm sure that there were some people living in the glaciers, but there wasn't a whole lot of food to be had on those glaciers, so they had to migrate down to where you could get flora and fauna and to where the animals were. It says here that in November of 2018, scientists reported the discovery of the then oldest known figurative art paintings, over 40,000 or perhaps as old as 52,000 years old, of an unknown animal in the cave of Lubang Jeriji Saleh on the Indonesian island of Borneo. So there we have ones in Borneo, which, if you think about that and you know where Borneo is, it's in the South Pacific and it's a warm climate. So maybe as the ice started encroaching down onto Asia, the species that were living there, be it Homo sapiens or Homo whatever, because there are different Homo species. There is 19 that I know of that have been found in the Homo sapiens genetic markers. You have the Neanderthals, Homo pithecus. We can go over that in a whole other one. But there's 19 different species of Homo that became standing and upright peoples. But Homo sapiens are the ones that actually survived into today. So just think about that. It says here that in December of 2019, however, figurative cave paintings depicting pig hunting in the Maros Pankep Karst in Sulawesi were estimated to be even older, at least 43,900 years old. The finding was noted to be the oldest pictorial record of storytelling and the earliest figurative artwork in the world. Okay, now artwork and storytelling goes together whenever you're thinking about cave paintings, because most of the time cave paintings would show either people blowing their hand art onto the walls, which one of the weird things about the hand art, it has now been determined by some scientists, I have not verified this through any peer review journals, but they're saying that a lot of the hands that are on these walls are from adolescents, are from children. So that would make sense, because the kids in any society, they have the most time just to have fun. They are always looking for something to do. Well, maybe the adult females were cooking or creating clothing for the tribe, and the males were out hunting. And so that makes sense that most of the cave hand paintings, blows are what I like to call them, because you know that it was blown onto the hand. So it was all done by adolescents, anywhere from the kids up to the teenagers, or up to the people that actually weren't into the foraging or the hunting for that given tribe. It's just very, very interesting. And if you think about the times, 44,000 years ago from right now would be right in the middle of the ending of the last major ice age on Earth. So I'm sure that at some point we as a society are going to find things that are older, but the question is when, and how many more caves are there that we can really, really explore. So that's something to always think about, is that at some point we will have looked at everything that we can possibly look at. It's going to take another ice age in order to drop water levels low enough around the world to where we can see other things that are hidden under the ocean, to where we can go and look at them. But at that point, there's going to be a whole lot of other things going on, and we can get into that in a whole other discussion. So with the dating, it says that nearly 350 caves have now been discovered in France and Spain that contain art from prehistoric times. Initially, the age of the paintings had been a contentious issue, since methods like radiocarbon dating can produce misleading results if contaminated by other samples, and caves and rocky overhangs where the parietal art is found are typically littered with debris from many time periods. But subsequent technology has made it possible to date the paintings by sampling the pigment itself, torch marks on the wall, or the formation of carbonate deposits on top of the paintings. Now that's very, very interesting if you think about that, because we have now gotten to a place in our society to where we can use science to determine our genetic makeups. We can really test things like, say, the pigments that they were using just to blow onto the walls, and the carbon from the torch marks. Well, that's carbon. We do carbon dating, so it would make sense that using the torch marks on the walls would allow us to sample that carbon and then determine exactly how old that carbon is. So that is an amazing way in which to find things. The oldest known cave painting is this one probably has to, you know what? No, okay. Or the formation of carbon deposits on top of the paintings, which we already went over. The subject matter can also indicate chronology. For instance, the reindeer depicted in the Spanish cave of Cueva de los Monedas places the drawings in the last ice age, which we've discussed before. Since we know that they are 44,000 years old, roughly, well, that would make sense that it is in the ice age. So that is one of those things that you always want to look at. The oldest known cave painting is a red hand stencil in Maltreviso Cave, Cancieres, Spain. It has been dated using the uranium-thorium method, which is radioactive dating, to older than 64,000 years. Okay, 64,000 years is in the Ice Age, because the last Ice Age, we as human beings have determined that it lasted for roughly 50,000 to about 70,000 years. So that would put it right in the Ice Age. And it was made by a Neanderthal. The oldest date given to an animal cave painting is now a depiction of several humans figures hunting pigs in the caves in Indonesia, like we discussed, dated to be over 43,900 years old. Before this, the oldest known figurative cave paintings were that of a bull dated to 40,000 years in Borneo, and a depiction of a pig with a minimum age of 35,400 years in a cave in Sulawesi. So it would appear that a lot of these caves where a lot of the paintings were actually found are in this area down in Indonesia called Sulawesi. And that's very interesting because you would have to look at all of the data about how the weather was around that area. And I'm willing to bet that the weather for over the last 50,000 years in that area where all of these caves are at was very constant. It might have went up a little bit, it might have went down, but you didn't have the actual ice age. So people were able to take the time to make these. They were able to draw on the walls, because if you look at this painting on the wall right here, you can see that it has horns, it has a body. It's very, very rudimentary, so it's just very interesting. As we go down here a little bit more, speaking, the earliest known European figurative cave paintings are those in Chauvet Cave in France, and these are dating to earlier than 30,000 BC in the Upper Paleolithic according to radiocarbon dating. So if you take the difference in between the caves that were found down in Indonesia versus the caves in France, you're talking about a difference of almost 20,000 years. Or not, no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. It's not 20,000 years. It's 14,000 years, because you're going from 43,900 down to 30,000. So that's 15,000 or 14,000 years. Think about that in terms of just right now. If you go back 14,000 years from right now, which is 2023, that puts us at 12,000 BC. Roughly. So imagine that all the world history that we have written down right now, that with, I'm speaking of the cuneiform, of any other types of writing, only take us back to 3,500 BC. So if you go back to 3,500 BC up to today with the cuneiform and the hieroglyphics, you're only talking about 5,500 years. This is a difference of 15,000 years, 14,000 years. So it's twice as much time in between where the oldest paintings are to where they find them in Europe versus down in the South Pacific. That's twice as much time as we have in actual known, verifiable, written human history, which is the hieroglyphs and the cuneiform. So there's so much to history that we have to encompass whenever we're thinking about paintings or hieroglyphs or anything else that was used to depict a scene or to tell a story. And how did all of those things work together? How did they all come to being into what we now know as modern language? Because there's multiple modern languages, but we only find the cave paintings in certain areas. Because first of all, you have to have caves in order to have a cave painting. So what happened to all of the history that was written down or that was recorded in all the spaces that didn't have caves. It's just gone. And it's a shame that we can't go back and actually look at those things, but that's history. And we just have to try to find where we have stuff at certain places. So going down here, speaking about France, dating to earlier than 30,000 BC, some researchers believe that the drawings are too advanced for this era and question this age. However, more than 80 radiocarbon dates have been obtained by 2011 with samples taken from torch marks and from the paintings themselves, as well as from animal bones and charcoal found on the cave floor. The radiocarbon dates from these samples show that there were two periods of creation in Chauvet, 35,000 years ago and 30,000 years ago. So right there, you have 5,000 years difference. Well, there's only 5,000 years difference in between where we are today and the first actual hieroglyphs that we can date to the Old Kingdom in Egypt. And that is widely considered by a lot of people all around the world to be one of the earliest forms of human writing. Well, they can date radiocarbon dating in these caves in France to a period of 5,000 years. So just keep that in mind, is that whenever you're speaking of anything beyond the old pharaohs in Egypt or in Sumeria or anywhere else in the Middle East, that they have time frames that are just as big whenever you're talking about just the cave paintings. The radiocarbon dates from these samples show that there were two periods of creation in Chauvet, 35,000 years ago and 30,000 years ago. One of the surprises was that many of the paintings were modified repeatedly over thousands of years, possibly explaining the confusion about finer paintings that seemed to date earlier than the cruder ones. Well, okay, so let's take the red ochre one here showing the bull, and then take this one right down here that shows in France. Well, this one looks a lot more detailed. You can see good outlines. You can see a horn. This one actually looks like a rhinoceros if you think about it. These look like rhinoceros because it's got the double horns. It's got the horn right there. So that would make sense that if an earlier person made a painting like this one with the red ochre, and then you come back and go, oh, well, I can touch that up. So you get the advancement of the arts of the cave paintings just by simply looking at what was drawn over older cave paintings. So you have the advancement of a civilization because they have taken older art and started working on it because they didn't realize back then that, oh, well, you're not supposed to touch that older art. Maybe it was part of their culture to actually refine, to make something better than it was before. We don't know. We didn't live there. We do not know the circumstances. We can theorize. We can make a guess now and then, but we really don't know because we did not live there. So going down here a little bit farther, in 2009, cavers discovered drawings in Coliboaia Cave in Romania, statistically comparable to those at Chauvet, and initial dating puts the age of an image in the same range as Chauvet at 32,000 years old. So there's the paintings that were in two different major places. Romania is like up here in Europe, and France is way down here. So are the chances that those two cultures met and shared? Possible, but they would have had to have gone over mountain ranges. They would have had to have migrated. These guys would have had to have migrated up. This group would have had to have migrated down because there's thousands of miles in between Romania and France. So that's very, very interesting that two cultures, and we know that a third culture, the one down in the South Pacific, they made cave paintings. So even though the species was spread all around our globe, the same types of cave paintings were being done around the world. Very, very interesting how the progression of the art, of the language, because these might have been languages. These might have been exactly what the people were trying to do, was going, okay, we need to make a written history of a hunt, or they might be giving coordinates to where these animals were found. We really don't have all of that information because we haven't deciphered it all. So that makes that much more fun. But it was their language, it was their hieroglyphs, it was their way of transmitting thoughts to others, is by putting up paintings. Or maybe it was just scribbles. Who knows? We really don't know. Some of the other examples, like in Australia, cave paintings have been found on Arnhem Land Plateau, showing megafauna that is thought to have been extinct for over 40,000 years. So there was even in Australia where they have cave paintings. There are cave paintings all around the world. So let's go down and let's talk a little bit, because we're already 25 minutes in. I honestly thought I'd be doing this faster, but I guess the actual speaking and the talking and the sharing actually takes a little bit. Subjects, themes, and patterns in cave paintings. Cave artists use a variety of techniques such as finger tracing, modeling in clay, engraving, bas-relief sculptures, hand stencils, and paintings done in 2 or 3 colors. Scholars classify cave art as signs or abstract marks. The most common subjects in cave painting are large wild animals such as bison, horses, aurochs, and deer, and tracings of human hands, as well as abstract patterns called finger fluting. The species found most often were suitable for hunting by humans, but were not necessarily the actual typical prey found in associated deposits of bones. For example, the painters of Lascaux have mainly left reindeer bones, but this species does not appear at all in the cave paintings, where equine species are the most common. Drawings of humans were rare and usually schematic, as opposed to the more detailed naturalistic images of animal subjects. Karen D. O'Hara, geologist, suggests in his book Cave Art and Climate Change that climate controlled the themes depicted. Pigments used include red and yellow ochre, hematite, manganese oxide, and charcoal. Sometimes the silhouette of the animal was incised in the rock first, and in some caves, all or many of the images are only engraved in this fashion, taking them somewhat out of a strict definition of a cave painting. Similarly, large animals are also the most common subjects in this many small carved and engraved bones or ivory, less often stone, pieces dating from the same periods, but these include the group of Venus figurines, which, with a few incomplete exceptions, have no real equivalent in Paleolithic cave paintings. Excuse me. So I haven't even brought up the fact of the things that were found, i.e. the Venus figures. And these were found all over the world. They are small little figurines, mainly carvings of what we consider to be Venus, because most of them have a large, voluptuous body. You rarely find these carvings in very thin. So maybe they equated that with fertility. Maybe they equated it with being able to survive the long winters, because a skinny person is going to have a lot harder of a time surviving a very harsh winter versus somebody that has a little bit of meat on their bones. So maybe that's why these Venus figures were actually carved the way that they were, and we can save that for a whole nother class. So going on them, they're let's go down here to the hand stencils formed by placing a hand against the wall and covering the surrounding area in pigment result in the characteristic image of a roughly round area of solid pigment with the uncolored shape of the hand in the center. These may then be decorated with dots, dashes, and patterns. Often these are found in the same caves as other paintings, or may be the only form of painting in a location. Some walls contain many hand stencils. Similar hands are also painted in the usual fashion. A number of hands show a finger wholly or partially missing, for which a number of explanations have been given. Well, I would have to imagine maybe they either A, lost their finger in some horrible accident, broke it, and it just had problems, maybe gangrene, they got an infection or something, and somebody cut it off to where it wouldn't infect the rest of the body. And Or maybe they lost it in a hunt. Maybe they got it bitten off by an animal. Maybe they had some wild problem with it, or maybe they were just born without a finger. Who knows? Because human genetics does do that. So that's a whole lot of the cave painting. We could go into the theories and interpretations, but we're a half an hour into this, and you know what? I want to move on to the next piece. So we go from cave paintings to the pictographs that were found in South America. Now, these are extremely interesting because of the fact of when they were found and when they were actually released. Towards the end of the last ice age, prehistoric artists painted tens of thousands of images including depictions of mastodons, giant sloths, and other now extinct animals on cliff walls in the Amazon rainforest. This picture is amazing if you look at it. It has all sorts of geometric things on it. You have squares, you have what looks to be some type of a statue here with people standing around it. That looks like a turtle. You can see other things, animals here. This one has long horns. But you can also see people in this cave painting. Or, I'm sorry, this is not a cave painting. These are cliff paintings down in South America. But this wave, these, which I can only describe as a sine wave on a piece of equipment. It's very interesting. This right here looks like a field. This could be corn stalk right here. But there's all these little sine waves. And it's not just the normal rolling sine wave, it's the up, down, over, down. So here you have something that looks like it might be a river right here. You can see other things growing along the river. So this looks like they were simply telling all of the different things, because this is a plot of land. This looks like a plot of land. These all look like plots of land. This right here looks like you have rows of plants being grown. So very, very interesting, which I wanted to bring up. Let's see if did I save the other pictures? Yeah, the pictures of the Sistine Chapel. But I wanted to go over when these were found. So this first enormous set of the images were found in 2017, but they kept the entire trove secret while continuing work and preparing a television series on this discovery. A British Columbian research team funded by the European Research Council spotted the paintings stretched across 8 miles of cliffs. 8 miles in the Colombian Amazon. That is huge. The red ochre art featured fish, lizards, birds, geometric patterns, and humans, including people dancing. In at least one image, a human dons a mask suggestive of a bird's face. Also shown are an extinct camelid known as Paleolama and a type of horse that lived in the region during the Ice Age. The pictures are so natural and so well made that we have few doubts that you're looking at a horse, for example, says the team leader Jose Irarity, an archaeologist at Exeter University. The Ice Age horse has a wild, heavy face, so it's detailed. We can even see the horsehair, and it's fascinating. Life Sciences' Laura Gegel reports that ancient artists created the works between 12,600 and 11,800 years ago. Now, I'd have to imagine that they simply took some of the ochre off of these walls and did the radiocarbon dating on it, which gives them that time frame. So these are literally, if you take the age of these, it would be just after the no, you know what? No, it falls right into the Younger Dryas impact theory, which that will be a class all on its own. And I can't wait to share all of those charts with you, because those will actually blow your mind once we start going over that. And the entire thing that encompasses, and what my thoughts are of interpreting those actual charts is just, it is really, really phenomenal. It's just amazing. So the paintings give a vivid and exciting glimpse into the lives of these communities. It's unbelievable to us today to think that they lived among and hunted giant herbivores, some which were the size of a small car. Woof. Huge. Okay, so we see somebody putting their hand up as a reference point. I would hope to God that they're not actually touching the wall, because if they're touching the wall, then they're transferring their oils onto the wall, which could actually ruin part of the painting. Which, if you think about the fact that these red ochres, every place where you find cave paintings, you typically find red ochre. So how did they figure out that this red ochre was good for this, or that it would last? Was it tested? Were there other paintings that were done in other mediums that are just not there anymore? They just simply faded out and disappeared over time? That's something that's very interesting, and you would have to ask yourself that question. Is it possible that there's a whole entire kaleidoscope of paintings on walls that we can't see because of the methods that they used? And it seems like red ochre is the one image, or the one medium, that really stood the test of time. Okay, so yeah, they just switched over to the other one, which shows a bird figure here. You see something that looks like circles. I can see different animals. But even after 12,000 years, you can still see these things on the side of the wall. And even down here, you can see where there were probably drawings, but they're faded. So how are they going to bring those out? I would have to imagine they would have to use some kind of ultraviolets or something along that way, just to bring the work out. Let's see, I don't think there was anything more in this article that I wanted to cover. Oh, one of the main reasons why this area has been inaccessible to researchers is due to Colombia's 50-year civil war. The investigation began after the 2016 signing of a peace treaty, but archaeologists still had to obtain permission from the rebel forces who had not signed on to the agreement to make the 5-hour trek through the forest to the actual cliff sites. So these are things that are just now getting put out. The researchers published some of their findings in April in the journal Quaternary International, and a documentary about the findings, Jungle Mystery Lost Kingdoms of the Amazon, which will air on British public television. So there's the documentary about the findings, Jungle Mystery Lost Kingdoms of the Amazon. So that's for that one. Now we can go and we can see some more of the pictures. I wanted to bring these up to show you the different pictures. Like we saw this picture, we were looking at this picture, but here's another one that shows a very long animal here. This looks like a long animal. Different ones, but we can pop up other pictures. Now these are showing Sistine, because this is called Sistine Chapel of the Ancients. But as you can see, we've already looked at these pictures. So I think this is the first one that we were looking at. Yes, it is. And it's loading. There we go. So I think, oh, is this, ooh. So let's go ahead and here's an even more detailed one. So you can see it looks like the red ochre has actually bled down, or maybe there was water up to this point and all the red ochre just kind of smeared its way around. But this is the same exact one, but it's in a little bit more detail, and it shows a little bit more over on this side. But these geometric patterns are everywhere on this. It's just amazing. You have what I would appear that this was probably showing water here. There's two different little aqueducts of water. Or maybe these are to show buildings. Maybe it shows buildings. Who knows? Birds, it looks like. There's so many different ones that look like turtles. Or maybe these are men. Who knows? These might be men. This one's an animal for sure. But it just looks like a turtle. This looks like a turtle. That looks like a turtle. Very, very interesting paintings. So that's the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients. And of course you can see the other Sistine chapels. I don't think there was any more from the cave paintings, as I recall from that one. So let's go ahead and move on to Egyptian hieroglyphs. So you go from 40,000 to 30,000 to 15,000 years ago for the cave paintings and for all of those, but onto Egyptian hieroglyphs. These, as we think of them, are, well, let's go ahead and let's just break it down. Because Egyptian hieroglyphs were the formal writing system used in ancient Egypt, used for the writing of the Egyptian language. Hieroglyphs combined logographic, symbolic, and alphabetic elements with some 1,000 distinct characters, which is a big difference if you think about just the English language that has 26 characters from A to Z. You have over 1,000 distinct characters in the Egyptian. The only other one that comes close to that would be Chinese writing, which there's only two types of major Chinese. There is Mandarin and Cantonese. So anybody that says, oh, the Chinese language, well, that's not exactly a proper statement. The actual proper statement is Mandarin and Cantonese, because those are the two main forms of language in the area known as China. And then there are many, many dialects that break down from those two main. But those are the two main ones. But that's on a whole different story. So talking about this, cursive hieroglyphs were used for religious literature on papyrus and wood. The later hieratic and demotic Egyptian scripts were derived from hieroglyphic writings, as was the Proto-Sinaitic script that later evolved into the Phoenician alphabet. So hieroglyphs were the precursor to the Phoenician alphabet. And we know that the Phoenician alphabet is what became later on into the Greek and the Aramaic scripts. The Egyptian hieroglyphic script is ancestral to the majority of scripts in modern use. Most prominently the Latin and Cyrillic scripts, though Greek and the Arabic script, and possibly the Brahmic family of scripts through Aramaic, Phoenician, and Greek. So hieroglyphs were the first real major language, because you had a cuneiform before hieroglyphs, but that was simply a tallying most of the time. There were some things written, but hieroglyphs were the real main basic beginning of modern language as we Homo sapiens think of modern language. And it's only 5,500 years old, probably at the most, because you got to think of the old dynasty started in 3,500 BC, or the time period, as it says, 3,200 BC to AD 400. So they used hieroglyphs to write and to relay stories, to relay a message for 3,600 years. That's a long time. So just keep that in mind. It's very interesting how hieroglyphs were the basis of everything that comes after it. The use of hieroglyphic writing arose around the proto-literate symbol systems in the early Bronze Age around the 32nd century BC, which is 3,200 BC. With the first decipherable sentence written in the Egyptian language dating to the Second Dynasty, 28th century BC, Egyptian hieroglyphs developed into a mature writing system used for monumental inscription in the classic language of the Middle Kingdom period. During this period, the system made use of about 900 distinct signs. The use of this writing system continued through the New Kingdom in late periods and on into the Persian and Ptolemaic periods. Later survivals of hieroglyphic use are found well into the Roman periods, extending into the 4th century. So even after the fall of the last major pharaoh period, they were still using hieroglyphs in Roman times, all the way up through the 4th century. So that tells you just how massive hieroglyphs were to written language at that time. Even into the Roman Empire, hieroglyphs were still very, very much needed and used. Although attempts, with the final closing of pagan temples in the 5th century, knowledge of hieroglyphic writing was lost. So right around 500 AD, it just kind of died out as a language. Well, we will be looking at climate changes throughout the well, let's see, what's a word I can use? Epochs of the world on later history classes. And you're going to see there were certain times whenever the earth was plunged into cold or it was plunged into a heat wave. And the heat waves corresponded with great times of building, with great times of human expansion. And the cold periods, we had death, we had famine, we had starvation, we had a shrinking of the cultures, we had a shrinking of the people all around the world. And it's going to be interesting to see where we are 1,000 years or even 2,000 years from now. Will we go through another one of these shrinking phases? It's just going to be very, very interesting. So we know that our knowledge of hieroglyphic writing was lost right around the 5th century. Although attempts were made, the script remained undecipherable throughout the Middle Ages and early modern periods. The decipherment of hieroglyphic writing was finally accomplished in the 1820s by Jean-Francois Champollion, which this man, he has to be considered one of the most influential and important men in our history, in the history of humans. He has to be considered up there with Galileo, with Newton, with Da Vinci, with any one of a number of people, Einstein. He literally broke the Rosetta Stone. He broke it and found out how to use it to decipher hieroglyphs into modern languages. And it's such an amazing documentary on him. If you get a chance to actually look him up and do some research on him, it is fascinating with how it just went down, because he is the one that managed to figure out exactly what was written on those old walls all over Egypt and in all the temples. And it's just phenomenal, because the same stories we were able to figure out that were passed down from the Egyptian times into the Roman times, into the early ADs, and on into what is now considered modern history. Modern history can only be really counted as from the Dark Ages, say 1200s to 1500s up till now. That is modern history, because we have a complete recording of certain things that have happened throughout history. So Jean-Francois Champollion, he is the one person that we owe a lot of this knowledge to, because he was able to show that, yes, this wasn't just pictures on a wall, it was an actual language, and he broke that. The number of words contained in all ancient Egyptian texts known today is approximately 5 million, and tend towards 10 million if counting duplicates such as the Book of the Dead and the Coffin texts separately. The most complete compendium of ancient Egyptian, Warterbuchder, I can't pronounce that, contains 1.5 to 1.7 million words. Unbelievable. Etymology. The etymology of the word hieroglyph comes from the Greek adjective hieroglyphikos, a compound of hieros, which means sacred, and glypho, which means carved. So it's hieroglyphs are sacred carvings. That's what the etymology is of the word. The glyphs themselves, since the Ptolemaic period, were called the sacred engraved letters, the Greek counterpart to the Egyptian expression of God's words. In English, hieroglyph as a noun is recorded from 1590, originally short for the normalized hieroglyphics 1580s, with a plural of hieroglyphs from adjectival use. So, yeah, it's just explaining all the etymology of the word. But it's very interesting how each culture has different origins or what it describes as hieroglyphs. But the hieroglyphs are just it is amazing that for over, I'd say probably 2,000 to almost 3,000 years, all of the dynastic Egypt, which is the kings and the pharaohs of what is considered the Egyptian area, because the Egyptian area expanded and contracted over all that time, depending on who was considered to be the ruler of all of Egypt, be it the upper or the lower Egypt, because there were times throughout Egypt whenever the upper and the lower areas were broken, and you didn't have one ruler over both areas. So you have to take that into consideration if you go and you do research on hieroglyphs, that there might be differences in certain hieroglyphs from certain areas, because one area might have been ruled by a whole different section of people versus the northern section. And I'm about to sneeze. I'm trying not to sneeze. We got about 9 minutes left of this that I want to do, because I want to do this for about an hour, but I still got to go over the Rosetta Stone, so we might go over an hour. So let's take a look at some of the hieroglyphs just from Saqqara itself. I brought up a whole bunch of different pictures. You had hieroglyphs that were engraved into the walls, into pillars, and it's very interesting because we could spend hours and hours and hours learning about it. The ancient Kemet alphabet. This was what hieroglyphs are called by Egyptians. And each one of the hieroglyphs means a certain thing. Like you have hieroglyphs here above a picture. So this might be telling exactly what this picture means in this photo. Anytime that you see one of these, this line with a wide oval on it, this is a stele. And steles are typically reserved for the royalty, and they are names. Anytime that you see one of these with the line and then the long broad circle and then hieroglyphs inside, these were steles. They were reserved for the pharaohs and the people that were rulers. Here you see another stele that is standing upright. This one is long ways. But anytime that you saw one of these, it was of a ruler or a leader. And that's how they would put their name. It was their signature, so be it, on the walls. But there are so many different ones that you can see. Like let's take this picture. These are a whole bunch of different stele of different rulers. Okay, so yeah, it's a Saqqara king list with the detailed hieroglyphs. So each one of these stele was a different pharaoh's or ruler's name, and they were probably done in succession, because it looks like this was broken, and it looks like they tried to bring a part in there, but these all showed actual names of all the pharaohs or the rulers in a dynastic line. And you can tell that they were pharaohs by these right here. This is the actual pharaonic symbol. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, whenever you see this right here, which is a cobra, and they're holding the stick tassel, that means that they were the rulers of Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And that's how you would define whether or not they were true pharaohs over all of Egypt or over just one. I believe that the crown was for Upper Egypt and this was for Lower Egypt. So you just have to take that into consideration. Or the cone might have been for a temple priest, but I do know that these ones were definitely for the pharaohs that were full pharaohs. But as you can see, some of them didn't have the Lower Egypt rod scepter. So this one only was over Upper Egypt, whereas this one was over Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, but this one is Upper and Lower Egypt both. So I do remember that part of my teachings whenever I took an in-depth literally half a year course on history of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Very, very fun course, and man, the just the in-depthness that can be spent. But I just want to go over certain things. The one thing I definitely wanted to go over, in which we have today, has been the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients that was found down in South America, the way that cave paintings developed into the other things, and how cave paintings led us up to the hieroglyphs. So let's go over the Rosetta Stone. Now, the Rosetta Stone, an ancient Egyptian stone bearing inscriptions in several languages and scripts, their decipherment led to the understanding of hieroglyphic writing. An irregular shaped stone of black granite, 3 feet 9 inches and 2 feet 4.5 inches wide and broken in antiquity. It was found near the town of Rosetta, about 35 miles northeast of Alexandria. It was discovered by a Frenchman named Broussard or Brouchard in August of 1799. So you have to go all the way back to 1800. Right around 1800, after the French surrender of Egypt, it passed into British hands and is now in the British Museum. Personally, I think the Rosetta Stone should be kept in Egypt, in the Grand Egyptian Museum. This is one of the most important artifacts from history. It is immeasurable how important it is to written language, and it should be in the country of its origin, which is in Egypt. It shouldn't be kept in the British Museum. I'm sorry, it just shouldn't. The inscriptions, apparently composed by the priests of Memphis, summarize benefactions conferred by Ptolemy V and were written in the 9th year of his reign in commemoration of his accession to the throne, inscribed in 2 languages, Egyptian and Greek, and 3 writing systems, hieroglyphs, demotic script, a cursive form of Egyptian hieroglyphs, and the Greek alphabet. It provided a key to the translation of Egyptian hieroglyphic writing. The decipherment was largely the work of Thomas Young of England and Jean-Francois Champollion of France, like I was saying. These are the men right here. These are the ones that basically allowed us to start reading ancient history. Ancient to us, because it was only 2,000 to 4,000 years ago, but they literally broke it all. And it's just insane. The hieroglyphic text on the Rosetta Stone contains 6 identical cartouches, oval figures enclosing hieroglyphs. Young deciphered the cartouche as the name of Ptolemy and provided a long-held assumption that the cartouches found in other inscriptions were the names of royalty. By examining the direction in which the bird and animal characters faced, Young also discovered the way in which hieroglyphic signs were to be read. In 1821-1822, Champollion, starting where Young left off, began to publish papers on the decipherment of hieroglyphic and hieratic writings based on the study of the Rosetta Stone, and eventually established an entire list of signs with their Greek equivalents. He was the first Egyptologist to realize that some of these signs were alphabetic, some symbolic, and some determinative, standing for the whole idea or object previously expressed. He also established that hieroglyphic text of the Rosetta Stone was a translation from the Greek, not, as it had been thought, the reverse. The work of these 2 men established the basis for the translation of all future Egyptian hieroglyphic texts. So those 2 men are the ones that ushered in the ability to be able to read hieroglyphs from ancient Egypt and learn about their ancient culture. Let's go ahead and zoom in on the Rosetta Stone. I wanted to, let's see if it will zoom in anymore, probably not. So up here you can see the actual hieroglyphs, and then here was the cursive form of the hieroglyphs, and then down here was all the Greek. So they literally took all the hieroglyphs that were here, they made it into the Egyptian cursive form, and then made all of the corresponding words from here into Greek, and then they were able to actually break down which ones meant what, and then go back and they made out their list of all of the different forms and the notations of the hieroglyphs. One of the interesting things is it's either this piece right here or this piece here was broken and lost in the movement of the Rosetta Stone, because I believe this piece was never recovered whenever they found the Rosetta Stone. But it was either this piece or this piece, I cannot remember which one it was actually lost, and it's still missing to this day, 220 years later, whenever they moved it from its initial finding spot to London. So somewhere in somebody's room or house or somewhere, it's just gone. It has yet to be found, and I'm quite sure that if it's in a human's hands, they are loath to ever give it up, because they would not want anyone to know that it was their family that had that piece. But this piece or this piece would definitely uncover a whole lot more, because we have all the writing here and here for what's here, but we just don't know what these symbols are. We have no idea. And it's the same thing here. We've got this, and you know what? Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure that it's this piece that is missing, because we were able to take all of the pieces that were here in this section and transfer it down into Greek, because we had these ones, and it was able to be translated out. But again, we're missing all of these hieroglyphs here. We're missing this translation here because we have the Greek piece here. So it's just very, very interesting with the Rosetta Stone. So you have from the cave paintings all around the world, because you had cave paintings in Europe, in Borneo, in Australia. You go to the petroglyphs of South America that were on the side wall of a cliff. And you go up to Egyptian hieroglyphs. So you have from 44,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago in the Amazon to 3,500 years ago in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and all the way up to where we found the Rosetta Stone that was able to break down the hieroglyphs. And this is just one of the paths that human language and knowledge was passed down. And with that, we end this first class of alternate history. Hopefully, I was able to share some things that you weren't in knowledge of before. We could definitely go deeper into Egyptian hieroglyphs, because you could really study those and talk about those for hours on end. I haven't really decided what the next class is going to be on, but I definitely wanted the first one to be on how language moved through the eons to where we are today, where we have multiple different languages and multiple different speeches all around the world, but everything pretty much started from the same thing: blowing red ochre onto walls and depicting animals. Those were our first real abilities, or the only things that are left that we can study, and it developed language into what we know it as of today. And with that, I will close this alternate history class. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for watching. And if you have any comments, please leave a comment as to what maybe you would like to see talked about next, and we will set up the next class for that. With this being said, it's Douglas McMahon. You have a good day.